Hey everyone, Sarah Peck here, and this is the Startup Pregnant podcast. The process of birth and giving birth is a powerful one. For some, it can trigger old wounds and traumas and be something that really takes a lot of work to recover from. For our guest today, she shares that she really lost her voice and her purpose throughout her pregnancy, and she found herself asking questions like, what does it mean to be a mother in a hyper-capitalist, extremely patriarchal world? And how do you overcome depression and trauma while being a mother? For Peng Scheerer, who also goes by the name Peng, she shared that having children and becoming a mother was and is the greatest challenge there is in her life. She said, "Motherhood is the fastest, hardest, most challenging, and unasked for psychotherapy. It forces me to be the best version of myself every day." In today's episode, we talk about her birth and death and rebirth as an artistic person, her children's book, which is called Two Mothers for Oscar, the PhD she's working on, which revolves around female narratives and the red tent, her belief in the power of femme voices for revolution, and how motherhood felt for her and really disrupted and destroyed parts of her life, and the subsequent profound feeling of loss and disorganization you can feel throughout it all. Today's conversation was such a beautiful and open and honest and transparent one, and I had such a great time in this conversation, and I just cannot wait to share it with you. Welcome to the Startup Pregnant podcast, where we talk to creative leaders about what it means to be an entrepreneur and a parent. I'm your host, Sarah K. Peck. This podcast is made possible by sponsors like you. Consider supporting this podcast with a monthly donation on our Patreon page. Head to patreon.com/startuppregnant. We've got folks who we call our coffee friends who donate the equivalent of a cup of coffee each month to make this show possible. And we're backed by companies we believe in that can help make the lives of busy entrepreneurs and parents a little bit easier. If you want to become one of our company sponsors, head to startuppregnant.com/podcast and get in touch. All right, everyone, I have Peng Scheerer here on the line. I'm so excited to have this conversation. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi. So can you begin by telling us about your parenting journey?
Yeah, that's quite a big stretch. So I have two kids by now already. One is 6 and one is 2 girls. So I became a mother quite early for my circle of friends, so to say. Just to give you like a framing, most of my friends still don't have kids. So I started quite early, and I entered the relationship with my partner saying, I don't want kids at all. So within, I think, 3 years' time, he changed my opinion on that completely. So I became a mother when I was 28. And in Germany, we have quite a good support network. So you can take 14 months of paid parenting leave, actually. But because of my freelance work, I'm a freelance artist in the area of theater and opera, stage design at that time. I just newly had moved into the market, and I felt like I couldn't take off a year of my work because I felt I'd just get lost in the black hole of not being seen and not being visible as a freelancer. So I decided to go back to work after 3 months, and my partner took 11 months of parenting time, which we were really unprepared for, like of the implications that it brings. And that kind of spiraled us into a lot of very difficult stuff, because I got depressed because I couldn't be with the kid, and then he got depressed because he had to be with the kid, and we were traveling all the time. I think we lived in 5 different cities in her first year. And of course, that meant for my partner that in no city we had a network to support him for spending time with her and going on adventures. I was working a lot. It was very stressful. It kind of resulted in a pretty big relationship crisis, so to say. And then consequently to that, both of us really changed our professional outlook, and we cut down on the work we do, and we changed the work that we do, and we kind of tried to bring it back to Berlin and to have more of one place and less of so many different places. And I started traveling by myself, not always taking the family with me and kind of planting them somewhere else all the time, but more going forth and back between the cities. We merged to a better place because of all of these changes that we went through. We went through coupling therapy and I went through trauma therapy. And then we decided that we want another kid, despite all this crazy ass that had happened. Out of that came Ilma, the little one, and she's 2 now. And with her, I took a year of parenting time, which really healed a lot of the struggles that had come up with going back to work so fast with the first one. And yeah, so I'm now back into the workforce since a good year, I would say. And here we are.
You mentioned that you didn't want children and you changed your mind about that. Can you take us through those permutations? What was it like? Or what sequence of events started to change your mind?
So I'd been working in educational projects between going to school and going to university, and I really enjoyed that. So I was always a kids person. So I always got along with kids and I liked them around and I liked to interact with them. So it wasn't about not liking kids, but I felt that I don't necessarily need my own kids to kind of fulfill this need to have kids in my life. It was kind of clear to me that with the job that I chose, family would be a very difficult adventure. When I met my husband, I just finished university and I was really ready to go and I was ready to have a career. And I didn't really want to compromise on that. And then 2 things really changed my mind. One was that he was very clear on wanting and needing his own kids, because I was never opposed to that idea. I could kind of follow that quite naturally. And then the real, very important step that it kind of pushed me was that he was very clear on wanting to share the workload and very clear on wanting to support me to still be able to work and pursue a career. And yes, a very feminist outlook and perspective. And I think that was the biggest reason why I chose to have kids with this specific partner, because I believed that in this scenario, I could do it because he would help me through and it wouldn't be by myself and alone. And it wouldn't be a matter of or a question of kid or career or whatever.
That's so interesting because I think so many of us are cultured as a default to want children from the outset, whether or not that's really our deep desire, like our personal desire. There's so much in the culture to tell women that kids is something they should and want to have. So I'm so grateful to hear that that's something that you said, no, actually, that's not for me, I don't think, and making that decision. How long had you known that you didn't want children? What was that process like for you, if you don't mind me asking?
I would say I hadn't really thought about children until going to university. So it wasn't really a yes or no. It just didn't really cross my mind. And then from going to university on, I was very heavily focused on my artistic career. So for maybe 6 years, I was feeling pretty sure that this was something that was not on my priority list. And then kind of shifted that within 2 years, I would say. One really important aspect was, of course, that by him being so clear that he wanted his own kids, he kind of put into the room, if you're not going to say yes, this is going to question the relationship. Because if we can't find a vision around this together, then maybe I have to find this vision with someone else. So, of course, yeah, that was also playing a part.
I think that's so interesting because that can happen in so many variations in partnerships. And I've heard people talk about, well, neither person is really has a strong opinion. So it's also hard to make the decision because people are like, well, I'll do it if you want to, but I'll do it if you want, it's like, well, and then, my partner and I were similar. I was the one who was very adamant about children. I even put it on my online dating profile. It's like, if you don't want kids, let's not go on a date. Cause I don't want to bother having to even go down that path. And when we met, there was a lot of conversation about it. Is this something we can, exactly as you said, see a path forward, get behind a similar vision? And if so, what would that look like?
And I really appreciated him putting his needs down so clearly. And he did it twice because he put his needs down surrounding wanting to be a father, and he put his needs down surrounding the question of getting married. And I didn't want to get married when we met, and now we're married. So he's a very persuasive guy. So
but you are also a very determined and opinionated person. So for people who are listening, like this must have been quite the conversation or series of conversations, because it's not like you're somebody who just says, sure, why not?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But then in the end, to me, it was more important to be with him than not to be with him over something like that.
I think that's so interesting. And it's so emblematic of so many different pieces of partnerships, because like when you get into a partnership, there's two different humans. And then when you have children, there's more humans, and you're trying to make the best decision for all of them. And it doesn't necessarily mean like one person gets 100% of what they need, want, and desire. Like it's just one of the most complicated things about like, having to deal with another person.
It's constant compromise. And I would say it's also constant letting go of expectations.
Yeah.
That's really,
So you said you felt really unprepared for parenting. What do you mean by that? And like, what do you wish you had known? Or is there anything that could have prepared you?
I don't think so. So it's quite interesting because I recently spoke to someone who had just become a mother. So comparably to me, she had the baby quite late, in her late 30s, so around 10 years later than I. And she told me that she was totally over-preparing for this very moment in her life. And for me, it was the exact opposite. And she always asked herself, can I do this? Will this happen? Is this possible? And for me, it was the opposite. Like I didn't prepare at all. I didn't think about it. It didn't cross my mind. I didn't read anything about it. But I had the confidence, if it comes, the kid's just going to adapt. The kid's just going to adapt to this crazy lifestyle of traveling all the time, of two parents being artists, to all the craziness, because, they just don't know anything else. What they experience is the normal to them. So, and with this weird impression of everything's just going to run its course and the baby's just going to be there too, I went into becoming a mother. And of course, it did not quite go that way.
It does kind of knock you sideways a little bit. Like it is one of the hardest jobs there is out there. And there's not really a good training manual. And for so many people who are talented at things or like have some sort of competence, or we've spent 20 or 30 years of our life building up our skill sets in certain areas, having to go back to the drawing board and be really, really bad at something is so demoralizing.
Yeah. Yes. Oh. So I would say, in looking back, what didn't really knock me over is the things you have to do, like the actual practice of having a kid. The waking up, the feeding, the changing diapers, the caring for the kid when it's crying. No, like that was fine. But what knocked me over was the birth was a mortifying, horrible, traumatizing experience. I didn't expect that at all. I wasn't prepared for that. And then the birth triggered a childhood trauma that I'd stored and that I'd had known nothing about. So it really shot me into a very difficult mental health situation that kind of totally spiraled out of control in the first, say, 9 months after birth. So 9 months after the kid was born, I was highly depressed, thinking about suicide daily. I did not expect that at all, like the psychological, emotional impact that it would have on me.
Tell us more about the birth process too. I think having these preconceived notions about what it might be like and then really adjusting to the experience is something that so many women experience. Go through.
Yeah. So I went in with this image of it's natural. Humans, women have done that since thousands of years. It's going to come. My body's going to know what to do. I was really certain about this. I was very confident in my body leading the way. And then in the night of the 27th to the 28th of March, now interesting that all the English terms are going to be a little tricky. The harmonious sac, is that the right word? Where the baby's in?
Oh, yes. No, but I know what you mean. And listeners, when the word comes to me, I'll mention it.
It didn't burst, which happens a lot of times. It just ripped a little and started dripping. And in Germany, at least, they say when that happens, within the next 24 hours, kid needs to come out because of the scare of infections, of possible infections.
The water breaking or the placenta?
Yeah. No,
water.
The water breaking, but not really breaking. So it didn't really break fully. It started leaking, I would say. And if it starts leaking, bacteria can also go up because something's coming out. And yeah, that created a lot of pressure that she needs to be out in 24 hours and the contractions didn't start. And I mean, I'm not going to go into all of these details, but after like maybe 12 hours of heavy contractions and for 4 hours, I was feeling like I need to push. And everybody told me, you're not ready. We can't feel the cervix opening. It's like something's off. And then my partner actually, at 2:00 in the night, he looked at me and he told the doctors, like, even if you can't seem to find anything, but something's off, and I know my wife, and like something is wrong. We can't proceed like that. We need a change. And he decided with the doctors that we're going to go for a cesarean. Then they gave me a PDA. Usually a cesarean takes maybe 10 minutes, especially in an emergency. They need to be able to get the baby out real fast. And they started cutting, and the cesarean took 40 minutes. What happened was they cut me, and the straight muscles from my stomach hadn't regressed, so they had to cut through the muscles. And when they finally arrived at the womb, the baby was gone, and it had moved down into the birthing channel, and it had taken the womb with her. So my feeling of having to push was right, and their impression of the cervix not opening was also right. So I was just in front of the womb ripping, which is like a situation of life and death, because if it rips, you can bleed to death, or they just take out the whole thing and you can't have any kids anymore. Yeah, very dire situation, and nobody had really like seen this before. So they had to enter vaginally and like kind of push her back with a fist back into the womb to get her out of the cut. And it was a very terrible slaughtering house, crazy. No one should go through that experience.
Oh boy. And then you said it unearthed a whole bunch for you, including traumatic memories. How did you experience that? And how did you know to do something about it, to get help?
It took a while to understand. So the understanding came around a year later when we started going to couples counseling. And probably in the first or second session, the therapist looked at me and said, you display behavior of post-traumatic disorder. And I'm pretty sure you have a childhood trauma connected to relationship and bonding. And you really need to take care of that because it's interfering in your relationship with your husband. And that's when it really hit me. In that moment, I understood this is the truth.
Wasn't it amazing?
It was crazy. It was really crazy. And I remember that my husband, like in this whole year and like building up to this moment, we had so many situations where we were fighting and I was all over the place. And he kept telling me, you're not talking to me. It's not me. Like, you're not talking to me. I don't mean me as a person. Like, who are you talking to? So he could sense that my pain and my anger was directed at someone else. And I didn't understand what he was talking about. And I felt so left alone. I felt really lonely because I felt he's leaving the conflict and I don't have anyone to address anymore. It was very difficult. And when she pointed that out, like so many other occurrences fell into place. And that created such a relief because it started to make sense.
I mean, this is like one of the biggest challenges and struggles, I think, of parenthood. I will say motherhood, but also parenthood is it's so hard to be seen. And to be able, it sounds like you had this therapist who actually saw what was happening. And even your partner kind of saw, but the message wasn't getting through. I mean, it is just such a mind bender because things are coming up and it's emotional and everything's changing.
What I learned also in this process is the trauma is like a parasite. It's always interested in surviving. So of course, it creates blind spots for you not to recognize what is working inside of you. So even with my husband, like reflecting, you're not talking to me, you're talking to someone else. The trauma was so interested in surviving that I couldn't even look at the information.
That is such a wise and helpful way of explaining it. If you think about this thing that it's like fighting to live, these old, whatever they are, the belief systems, the patterns we have, the imprints we have from childhood. Oh, that's so interesting. And then how do you work through something like that? For me, in my experience, it's lifelong work. But for you with a therapist, how did you then move forward and what was able to change or not change?
We continued the couple therapy, and I went into a very extensive process of individual trauma therapy that took 1.5 years, I would say. And then I tried different formats. I worked with a shaman, and what I've been doing the last half year, which is also really adding to the process, is nonviolent communication. So yes, I would also say it's a lifelong process. And what's quite interesting is that I recently told a friend, now after 2 years after the birth of Ilma, I kind of feel hormonally back to a place where I was before all of this process, before becoming a mother. So now for the first time, because this is heavy, like the hormonal status changing so drastically in such short periods of time is kind of adding to the craze. I feel, for me it did, of not knowing oneself and losing oneself and experiencing emotions in a totally different way than 3 months before or 7 months before or 9 months before, because it's such drastic shifts. Now looking back onto these 5 years, I feel I'm kind of back to the normal status quo. And I'd say that the major part of this bonding trauma is resolved. That's what it feels like. Triggering is something that happens very rarely. I'm much better with stress in general, and I kind of really settled down. And yes, so 5 years.
I want to talk about this a little bit more, like what you're bringing up right now, the constant shifting and changing that happens. It's such a wild experience. I know so many people try to write about it, and yet when I was going through my first pregnancy, having your body change every week, every month, and just constantly being presented with this, what is my body? Who am I? And the relationship to that and identity. To me, I haven't spoken about this on the podcast too much. I've written about it, not published yet, but it really put me into a deep depression because you start to bind your identity to something. I'm athletic, I'm capable, I'm strong. Whatever it was that I thought that I was no longer. One day I'd wake up, I'm like, why are there yellow spots on my shirt? Oh, now my boobs are leaking. And, why can't I fit into these pants? And now my knees hurt. And just this constant barrage of shifting. It doesn't stop, too, when you have the baby. The hormones go even more afterwards. It's some nights I would shake and just sweat and shake. And other times I would just cry. And it felt like it was the only way I had of processing stuff to get it out. And but the identity piece, is that something that is true for you at all? How do you think about this?
You can't see me. I'm nodding. I'm nodding all the time. So entering this process of getting pregnant as an artist, the first pregnancy totally and utterly destroyed and erased my artistic identity. I completely dissolved into this weird nest, or I don't know, that would foster this growing organism. And I could really feel losing my voice over this, because the only thing that kind of stayed was nurturing this thing. And quite soon in the pregnancy, I had really massive feelings of alienation toward this person inside of me. I kept thinking, we have 8 trillion people on this world, and someone is inside of me. I don't know this person. I don't know who this is. Inside of me, that's the most intimate image, right? That you can imagine of 2 people intertwined like this. And I don't know this person. That was freaking me out. That was really freaking me out. Then I would say, as a conclusion of this, it was almost a cleansing process, an artistical cleansing process, because after having birthed her in this crazy birthing experience and then going through all of this trauma and this hurt and this pain and working through it, and with my partner going through this very dire periods, I feel that my artistic voice has emerged stronger and more clear than ever. and more centered in the voice of a mother and a female, really coming from within with an agenda. And this I only have because of my kids. It feels like it was a necessary process, but it was hard. It was really hard.
Like the process of transformation, it doesn't matter how many times people write about it or create about it. You always see the end product and forget, at least for me, forget the brutality or the pain sometimes that is the process of being rendered into this new thing, and how like you don't start motherhood on day one and like at a brisk walk and just everything's dandy, right? I crawled on my floor across the carpet to get to the bedroom sometimes to get my baby out of the crib because I just could, I was like, my bottom hurts too much. It's just like, it is not pleasant mentally, emotionally. There's just so much that's changing. And I am happy to hear that it created this kind of new fire inside of you, and also grateful to hear that it took its time working through you.
It did. Yeah. It did really took its time. But I realized that quite a bit later, but my kids forced me to try to be the best version of myself every day. This is such a strong force. I didn't have that before in my life.
Yeah. So you mentioned you're an artist. Can you talk more about what that is, what you do?
I mostly work in theater and opera and performance, doing stage and costume design. And I'm also a conceptual artist. I create experience art. So it's all about storytelling and feeling and experiencing and emotions and music. And that kind of takes me all over Europe. Now I've been to Sarajevo, so it's a lot of traveling involved. Every project is in a different city. Every project's like between 5 and 8 weeks of being in a different city. The structure, the setup is a real challenge for the family, because when I'm there and I'm fully there with 150%. And when I'm gone, I'm really not there, and I'm not around the corner, and I'm not like a drive away. I'm really, Basel, I need to take a plane to go there, or Sarajevo, like I need to take 2 planes to get there. The organizational structure of this job is really hard to tackle for a family, I'd say.
Yeah. How does your partner, you said he's also an artist, right?
Yeah. He's an opera singer, but like we're both like quite multifaceted. So I also write and I do workshops, and he is an opera singer, but he also has a record label, and he's been producing a lot of queer feminist music. And now he's also kind of merging into the techno electronical music scene. He's doing a lot of events and festivals in Berlin and the surroundings. And yes.
How do you navigate the like push and pull between each of your artistic projects and what sounds like there's a lot of variation in schedules, at least by the nature of these careers?
Yeah. Organization is everything. And to find the right tools of how to structure and how to communicate and how to document. And that's 80% of the job. And then the other part is understanding the biggest scarcity in parenthood is time. And both of the people in the relationship nurturing the kid will feel they do more. And if not both of the people, I just recently read that, and if not both of the people feel that they're at least doing 60% of the chores over the other person, then they're not doing enough. So by default, there's some sort of disappointment or resentment involved. And it's really a lot about navigating that and being responsible for that as an individual and not bringing it back into the relationship, I feel.
Yeah. It's such a challenging one because the shape of work can be changing all the time, or the needs can be changing all the time, and the demands placed on each person can be different. And then there's just the ongoing conversation of like, are you happy with this arrangement? Are there resentments building up? Does anything need to change? Because I travel a lot more in our partnership, and we finally came to an agreement that like 3-to-1 is what works for us. Like I can take 3 trips for every 1 trip he takes, just because that's our desire, right? Yeah. That's what makes us both happy. But then if I take too many trips, it's too hard on my partner because he's doing so much solo parenting, and I miss my kid. I'm going to have another baby. And so then there's going to be a whole period where I'm not traveling very much. It's just so many logistics,
It's
right?
a lot of, and a lot of negotiation, I feel, really.
Yeah.
And I would also agree to, it's not necessarily 50-50 in everything. It's really, what do I need and what do you need and how can we align this? And it can mean like 3 trips to 1 trip because this is how it works for you. I agree. But then also, like on top of this, individual negotiations within each couple that have these problems or these challenges. On top of that comes the question of what is the like gender culture doing here? Is by default the woman doing more than the man? And do I feel it's an individual problem? But then I see it's a structural problem when I talk to my friends and see like similar occurrences. And this was really hard for me to navigate, to understand. There are a lot of individual problems and challenges in parenting. And then there's like the broader construct of the sexist society and how to navigate that. And these questions inside of this individual partnership with a partner that you actually love. I think for us, the setup worked best that we really both work on our loving eye and that we try to work on our perspective that the other person is doing as much as they can, as well as ourselves. Like everybody is doing as much as we can. And sometimes just doesn't get done.
Thank you for saying that, we live in a sexist society and a gendered society. And for, 90%, I'm making that number up for people listening, but for most women, if you're in a heterosexual partnership, we're just cultured to take on more of a certain type of work. There's a lot of invisible work. And I think it's hard to daylight. It's hard to acknowledge and talk about and point to. And I'm constantly waking up to it. I'm constantly seeing places where I'm like, oh, wow, I do a lot of that. I have a super feminist husband. And like, what about this thing over here? And it's not finished because culture's strong.
I would actually say the same. I'm married to a real feminist. So we both don't identify as heterosexual. My partner has another kid actually with 2 lesbian moms. So by default, we become this rainbow family. And we're really aware of a lot of this. He's been working on programs where he's implementing anti-racist tools and anti-sexism tools into companies and whatever. And still, he grew up in a setup that was very gendered and that was very sexist, and where the father was bringing home the money and the mom was a stay-at-home mom. And just to overcome this programming, even though if you have all the knowledge, it's just really hard. It's very hard.
Right. And it affects everybody's relationships because it's in the water that we swim in around there. Do you feel comfortable sharing about your partner and do you call it sperm donor? How do you talk about the relationship with the other kid?
Biological father. He's the biological father and the kid has 2 moms. I'm very comfortable to talk about it. I actually wrote a kid's book about it.
Yes.
That will come out this August in English and in German. And it's called Oscar and His 2 Moms. And I wrote it because I needed a book myself for our kids to talk about what we did there. And there was nothing on the market. So I just decided to write something myself. And it was a massive success, what I really didn't expect at all. So at the beginning of 2014, a friend of us asked my husband if he could imagine doing that. And he came home and he told me, and I was like, of course, let's do it. So then we took a year time to kind of research and understand the legal side. And because until actually 3 months ago, it was not allowed in Germany for a lesbian couple to have a baby.
That just recently?
Very recently changed the law. Yeah. When we decided to do that, it was still like no official way of doing that. And yes, it's been a very interesting ride because I would say that throughout the decision-making process and process of trying to have the baby or trying to receive the baby with the 2 women, I was quite anxious and I was thinking about a lot of the implications and like, what does it mean in philosophical terms and societal terms and what about responsibility? And I was reading Hannah Arendt like a maniac. I think also because we had this kid already and I, of course, came from the perspective of the mother of having carried a baby and having born a baby and then thinking of, and now I give it away. This is crazy. This is unfathomable to me. But of course, for him, the process was very different because he went to their house and did his business. And then he just gave them like this lukewarm cup with goo in it. And the business was done. He was surfing throughout this process very elegantly. And then when the kid was born and we got a text message in the middle of the night saying, okay, he's here with a photo, it really hit my partner because the kid looked exactly like him. It really hit him. I have a little kid now. And we did visit them for, I would say, almost a year because my partner didn't feel comfortable with it. He said, like, they need space to kind of form bonds, and especially for the mother who wasn't pregnant, she needs to get to know the kid. And of course, he knew exactly the position she was in because it was his position in our pregnancy of being the person who's just kind of observing and on the outside, and then for the first time gets to understand what this is when the baby's there. So we really gave them space to find themselves as a family. And then when we met them, Ilma was there already also. So it was 3 kids like getting to know each other from the go, and they really love each other. Up till now, it's been a very lovely experience.
This is so interesting to me. And I think it's important. One of the things that you're saying, we can prepare as much as possible for how we think we're going to respond to something. And yet we just don't know, you know. There have been so many instances in my motherhood journey where something happens and I thought I had prepared, like, it's going to be hard, it's going to be rough, it's going to be this. And other emotions come up, resentment, fear, sadness, loss, anxiety, whatever it is. And it's a really hard thing to navigate because you're walking into complex relationships and, you know, a kid that looks just like you. Oh, that must be heartbreaking. And then also amazing to have that be a possibility and something that's happened. So what's your relationship with them now?
We see them regularly, and it gives me a lot to see them as happy as they are. It's beautiful to have been part of that process, to make them so happy. It's also giving back a lot. And it's nice to have created this little community, and the kids, they relate to each other as siblings would. And it's something that makes me very happy. And I'm very trusting that if conflict will arise, we'll be able to solve that because we're all like responsible grown-ups. We can cross the bridges when they're there. So actually, when we decided this, my parents totally freaked out. They were very anxious and they were worrying about us. Like, they were thinking, what if they have like monetary claims, or I don't know, whatever. What if the kids want to have my husband in his life for much more than we are willing to give? And I don't know. From the very early process on, I was certain this kid is allowed to be as much part of our family as it wants to be.
I'm so inspired by like the future potential of motherhood and the community aspect of making these. Human relationships are messy and they're overlapping. And it was Krista Tippett who said the nuclear family is such a weird word. Like, if you think about nuclear as like explosive, like, oh, that might be a strange thing that we've invented, these little silos of families. And I love hearing stories of how people are intertwined with other families and communities in these ways. It's great.
Like, for me, the most important realization to support my husband through this decision was, if I want to live in a society where this is possible, I need to do it. Like, I can't only talk about it all the time. I need to create these societies in order to live in them. That was the thought that pushed me and created the yes, that's the way.
So the last question I want to ask you, I actually have a million questions, so I can't promise this is the last one, but I want to make sure I have time to ask you about your PhD. You're working on one around female narratives and the power of femme voices. Tell me.
Yeah, so I would say queer is more true. So the title of the research is Naming Ourselves, Disintegrating into a Queer Consciousness. And the idea is that we all live in a Leitkultur, which is a German word for leading culture or dominant culture of a male, white, heterosexual, capitalist culture. And to get a seat at the table in this culture, we all leave identity markers behind that make us into the individual humans we are. And I want to create a space of disintegration where people can go to kind of disintegrate and disobey this dominant culture to find back into their own individual humanness. A little bit similar to, it kind of emerges from the red tent idea. So you have a negative space at the fringes of society where women were sent through menstruation and childbirth, rendered invisible to the male gaze. And this little space kind of formed into a weird anarchistic utopia because it was away from the male gaze, and it was away from the leading culture, and it was away from the dominant culture that would marginalize you. And it gave females the power to care for each other and to create trust and solidarity. And I want to take this concept and kind of merge it and make it broader and invite everybody, and want to invite everybody to disintegrate into their queer selves, and queer not necessarily only in the LGBTI context, but more in the everybody is uniquely different, and find this voice that makes you, and then go back into society to create a society of the many and of like hybrid identities.
Tell me more about what that looks like.
You mean in practice, or?
What does it mean to become more of your queer self and your many identities? Like, what does that look like for you? And what might that look like for me?
Like a very big process for me was to understand that I had neglected big parts of my femininity and kind of adapted to a much more masculine self in order to be able to live through this world. And I only realized that by becoming a mother. So what had happened is I have a long history of eating disorders, and I have a history of excessive sport and muscle building. So I had a very tense, muscular body, and I felt like I want to be like RoboCop, like my body needs to be fit and like strong, like a machine, and working and running, and my belly was very hard and trained, and I don't know. And then I became pregnant, and the belly's really firm because the baby is inside. And I mean, not everybody who's listening has maybe touched a pregnant belly. It's a very like quite counterintuitive, I feel, because if it looks quite voluptuous and soft, but it's really a tense belly. So still the emotions like sheltered behind the baby and behind this tense body. And then the baby came out, and all of this protection was gone. The muscles had regressed. It was just little soft tissue left, like hanging. And it felt like I had direct access to my emotional brain that had been stored away for such a long time. And I understood that I had adhered to these expectancies that, of course, girls who adapt to masculine standards are cool. A girl who likes Batman, that's cool. A boy who wants to wear a pink tutu, that's off. So I had internalized these notions of femininity being something that is faulty and weak, and softness as a problem. And for me, I would have needed this integrative space to reconnect to my softness and to understand it and to embrace it and to also make it a very powerful tool.
I think you're tapping into so many things you have words for that I feel that I don't always have words for. This is something that's like beyond gender in so many ways, because everybody, when I look at men and my son and the second boy that we have on the way, I just think about like how much damage we're doing to men and boys by this rejection of the femininity and not allowing them to express their emotions. God, it kills me when people say things to him like, grow up, man up, don't cry, boys don't cry.
Yeah.
Like, it just breaks something inside of me because my husband cries, you know, like everybody cries. And I can identify so much with what you're saying, because even in my own self, there's so much more prizing of the work and the productivity and the efficiency and the getting things done. And it's really hard to make space for the softer, more supple, like, I'm going to do something not because it has a purpose or an agenda or an outcome or a goal, but because the experience of being in it is important in and of itself.
Yes. This is why I chose the term queer, And this is why I kind of want to detach it from the LGBTI community, even though, of course, they also should be under the umbrella. But to actually say, like, everybody needs this, because we live in a culture that asks everybody to leave something behind in order to function in this like hierarchical, patriarchal, capitalist society. Everybody's leaving something behind. And let's look at that. Like, for everybody to gaze at what they have to cut off in order to take part, what is this? What you have to leave behind?
And in some cases, it's fine to cut things off to adopt an identity or a piece of yourself fully in one area, but not forever. Like, it's like, how do you deal with the oscillations and the transformations of moving throughout all these identities and owning them all and holding them all? And
also, I would say, if it's a conscious choice that you want to get rid of something, you're totally free to do that, right? But if the culture is forcing you because it's devaluating this trait, then it's horrible. And it's such a violent experience to go through. To understand, I can't be here because I'm Jewish. I can't be here because I'm female. Like, that is a traumatic experience. You're made invisible. You're made invisible and faulty, and nobody likes to feel that way. Nobody wants to be faulty and off and wrong, and we all want to be right and accepted. And
that reminds me of something I was just hearing on another podcast with Dr. Shefali Saberi, I think is that say. I'm not sure how you say your last name, but I'll put it in the show notes. But she said, every assumption we have about who we should be as women, you know, that we should get married, that we should have kids, that we should do X, Y, and Z, those are all the gendered expectations that have been applied. And really, what if we started from a null set of all of these things are taken not for granted, but as not true? None of those things are true. And you get to choose if any of those things are things that you want.
For me, it rings very true. I mean, I have to say that I strongly believe in relationship anarchy. I don't know if that's a rabbit hole too many to go down. I totally believe that the nuclear family, in it being the smallest entity in a capitalist system, to have power over people is in itself faulty. It has been installed to put in place political structures and economical structures. And I think it's very important to question that and to disintegrate from that.
This conversation is fascinating to me. I told you when we started, we could probably talk for hours and then catch up more even after the podcast. Where can people find out about your art and your children's book and your PhD?
The children's book is actually going to be on Amazon. So you can just type in Two Mothers for Oscar, or in German, Zwei Mamas für Oscar. I do have a web page which is down at the moment because it's being restructured, but you can find me via susannescheerer.com. And then the PhD, we'll see. I mean, it's going to find its way into digital formats too. So the invisible tent.
Thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of these stories with everyone.
I was very happy that you had me.
This podcast is made possible by sponsors like you. Consider supporting this podcast with a monthly donation on our Patreon page. Head to patreon.com/startuppregnant. We've got folks who we call our coffee friends who donate the equivalent of a cup of coffee each month to make this show possible. And we're backed by companies we believe in that can help make the lives of busy entrepreneurs and parents a little bit easier. If you want to become one of our company sponsors, head to startuppregnant.com/podcast and get in touch. And you know, I always say this and I mean it. Leave us a review on iTunes if you like our show. It takes a few seconds and it really does help us a lot. If you want more of what we're talking about, go over to startuppregnant.com and get on our email list. We send out a weekly newsletter with time-saving tips for parents and entrepreneurs. And I always include a weekly gadget or tool or something awesome that we've stumbled upon to help make your life just a little bit easier. And as always, you can reach out to us at hello@startuppregnant.com. We love hearing from you.